Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. Are you ready to unlock the full potential and growth in your business? You've already crossed 7 figures in sales, but the challenge is knowing how to take your business to the next level. Join Josh Hadley, an 8-figure Ecomm business owner and investor, as he interviews highly successful business owners. Get ready, because you're going to learn specific actions you can take today to help your business reach its full potential and leave a lasting impact on the world.
Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hadley, where I interview the top business leaders in e-commerce. Past guests include Adam Heiss, Kevin King, and Michael E. Gerber, the author of The E-Myth. Today, I'm speaking with Dan Ashburn, the co-founder of Titan Network, and we are going to be talking a lot about how to scale profitably on Amazon in 2024. This episode is brought to you by Ecomm Breakthrough Consulting, where I help 7-figure companies grow to 8 figures and beyond. Listen, Dan, I started my business back in 2015, and I grew it to an 8-figure brand in 7 years. But I made a lot of mistakes along the way that made the path of getting to 8 figures take a lot longer than it needed to. There were mistakes that I made when it came to cash flow, supply chain, ordering the wrong amount of products at the wrong time, or hiring the wrong team members at the wrong time, and not having good hiring processes in place. So to our listeners, those of you who have hit similar challenges, what I wish I would have had is a mentor to help me overcome those stumbling blocks a little bit quicker, and I would have been able to get to those 8 figures faster. So for those of you hitting those similar obstacles, go to ecommbreakthrough.com. That's Ecomm with 2 M's to learn more. And as a special bonus to my podcast listeners, this month I'm giving away one $10,000 comprehensive business strategy audit session at no cost. All you need to do is email me at josh@ecommbreakthrough.com, and in your subject line, say strategy audit, and then tell me why I should choose you and your brand to work with for this month. But today, I am super excited to introduce you all to Dan Ashburn. Dan is an industry-leading Amazon entrepreneur with a team that delivers 9 figures in annual sales. Having used his ambitious and entrepreneurial mindset to build countless brands, Dan has become a sought-after speaker, inspiring crowds with his leadership and depth of knowledge on stages across the world. Dan is the head mentor on China Magic and is the co-founder of Titan Network. So that introduction, welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Josh. Really glad to be here, man.
Dan, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. You know, out of full disclosure, I am a Titan member, been to a few of your guys' Titan events. My team watches the Titan PPC videos on a weekly basis. They're always in those huddles. Nice. And so anyways, we follow a lot of your script, but I'm excited to be talking to you today because I think the topic of the podcast about how to scale profitably on Amazon in 2024 is much needed. As I attend a lot of different events and talk to a lot of different sellers, I think it's 90% of people that are saying, all I'm seeing is my profit getting reduced year over year over year. And even if my sales are increasing, my top line might be growing, my net profit margin is shrinking. Amazon fees keep going up. PPC costs keep going up. The competitors are only increasing. So Dan, I know this has been a subject on your mind and on Titan's mind recently. And I would love to hear, kind of what your thoughts are in terms of how can brands scale successfully and profitably in 2024?
Yeah, for sure. So I think what it comes down to, Josh, is really understanding where we're at as an industry, where the platform's matured to, and where the kind of macro factors are at that are all putting pressure on this system. If you really think about it, there's only a few core components here. We've got product, we've got the logistics, we've got the platform fees, we've got paid advertising, and then you've got your content that's kind of underpinning that. And within that, you've also got a market that's dictating the price. So when you take all of those different variables and understand that to get this right, you have to get each one of those cogs turning in the same direction, giving enough breathing space to the next cog so that at the end of the day, once you've spent money on advertising, to acquire a new customer, there's profit left at the end of the day. That's really the game. And as we've kind of matured on the platform, like you mentioned, Amazon PPC costs increasing, Amazon fees going up year on year, price suppression in the categories through more competition entering at a category level, sellers really have to get more sophisticated. It's gone from being what was kind of an amateur sport a few years ago to really being kind of like precision sport. And you have to kind of be like an Olympic athlete to compete on Amazon in today's world. But providing that you've got a system and you understand the broad picture of what it is you're trying to achieve, and then design a plan and strategies that all cohesively work together to deliver that, it still is hands down the best business there is, that you can start with really insignificant capital and generate significant revenue, as you've mentioned here at the start of the episode.
Yeah, I love that. Now, Dan, I'm curious to hear kind of your response to this question. A 7-figure seller, right, may stumble onto a 7-figure business just on their own, right? They maybe have a couple VAs themselves, but they're doing over $1 million in revenue on Amazon. But now they're seeing things are getting a lot more difficult. Margin compression, everything. They don't necessarily have the team, and they're starting to feel like they're being stretched too thin. What would your response be to a seller in that situation in terms of, you've got FBA fees to focus on, you got product costs, you've got PPC, the list goes on and on. Where should brands focus on first if they do want to try to scale to that 8 figures and beyond?
So we help a lot of sellers in this scenario that come into Titan, and effectively what they've got is $1 million product. They don't have $1 million business. And what I mean by that is they've got to that $1 million revenue mark, maybe on 2 or 3 SKUs. They've probably been doing it for some time. So those products are fairly me too. There's little innovation there. They look like the rest of the market. And they've got there just on pure grit with those products. And what we always do when kind of coaching these sellers to scale is actually they need to take a step back. They need to go back in their business to establish the correct foundations so that then they can take 10 steps forward. And step one of that is having a proven system to follow and implement that is predictable, repeatable, and consistently generates the result that you want to achieve. Once you've adopted that system and you're not just reacting to the platform or chasing shiny objects or throwing random tactics that you've picked up on YouTube or a Facebook group and expecting, it's kind of like trying to build a Ferrari with loads of different car engine parts and then expecting the Ferrari to run. But once you've kind of got all your parts together and you've got that blueprint, then it's identifying, right, who do I need to hire first? When do I need to hire them? What's the onboarding process? And what does that org chart need to look like that allows me to play my strengths whilst removing me out of my weaknesses and ultimately get that kind of production line in place to then begin scaling? The sellers that I see fail at this, Josh, are the ones that kind of forget that a business requires systems and processes and predictability. Like growth should be boring. It should be predictable. And they push ahead and effectively hit what I call a scaling wall, which is typically around kind of 5 million-ish a year. And it doesn't matter how much team or cash they throw at it. They find that it's a diminishing return and that kind of decline sets in because they haven't taken the time to establish a business and not a set of products.
Interesting. I like that. So you talk about creating a system, a repeatable process that you can use to find products, get them launched, and also creating a cohesive brand, I assume. You talked about building out your team. As you coach and you mentor other Amazon sellers, what are some of the first critical hires that you encourage them to make in order to start implementing a process or system like you talked about?
Yeah, sure. So inside of Titan, we have something called our team building framework, which we as Titan, we're at 200 team members now. Around 150 of them are operating on the Amazon platform. And what we've done is through our journey of kind of scaling through the different stages of growth and size of business, we've documented all that down into a complete framework for doing this. So depending on where you're at in the business and depending how big your business is, how much revenue, profit, et cetera, you're generating, and also your strength as the leader and the CEO of that business determines kind of that first hire you're going to make. Now, typically that's going to be more of a general manager type hire. Sellers typically start with a VA for this position that's taking care of those day-to-day repeatable tasks that don't require too much critical thinking. They're just automated, repeatable activities that need to take place. And the goal here is that you're buying back your time. You're freeing up your time to be the critical thinker, to then work on the innovation, which is where the growth happens. So that kind of general VA is a good starting point. And then from there, depending on the objective for the business, depending on the category, the product set, there are different org charts that you can kind of pursue from there onwards.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And one thing that I've, talked to other sellers about is really it comes down to identifying what your strengths are. What is it that's unique that you bring to the business? And then trying to get everything else that you're doing off your plate, right? If you love PPC and you feel like that's one of your core strengths, then that's great. Double down on it. But if it's not, then what you should be looking for is, trying to find the right hire or the right partner, whether it's agencies or not, to be able to take some of that off your hands. Now, Dan, all of this is much easier said than done, as we know, right? Because coming up with new product ideas and especially PPC, right? That is no small animal to tackle. That's not something that you can just go train somebody and a week later they're ready to rock and roll. So what would be kind of your recommendations in terms of like, how do you find the right people? Are you encouraging people to go poach talent from other successful brands, or, go hire people with, six-figure, $200,000 plus salaries to their business, or where do you begin?
So before jumping into the hiring stage, I think it's important for sellers to be in a position where they're confident in delegating, but not ignorantly handing off. And what I mean by this is before you bring anyone into the business to start running your PPC, you first need to have control over the PPC system you're running. You need to understand, okay, for each given SKU, for each given product, what is the objective for where the product is currently at in its life cycle? So the life cycle stages are fluid. Products often move from launch into growth, into maintenance, sometimes back into a need for growth, sometimes back into scale. And understanding the objective of PPC within the broader business at a product level is step one. Once you understand the objective, you then need to understand the strategies, the campaign structures, and effectively the system that you're going to deploy to achieve that objective. And then you need to understand how to measure success and establish the tracking so that you can determine, are you on track or off track in delivering that objective towards your bigger goals. Only then, once you're confident with that and you've got a plan and a system that is predictable, repeatable, consistently delivers results, can you then decide how you're going to delegate it and bring that in. Now, you could go work with an agency, and there's some very good agencies out there, but the biggest mistake I see sellers make is handing off their growth strategy for their business to a third-party agency when they haven't yet mastered or controlled it themselves. So they can't actually direct that activity as part of the wider business. You could bring in a VA with a background in, say, Google PPC, broader industry, same philosophy. A lot of these platforms are universal. Google's obviously just ahead in terms of years. And then train them in the system that you've found to work best for you. Or you can go and recruit talent. I think one thing that the industry is benefiting from right now is how many years we've been going. I've been at this since 2014 now, so coming on 10 years. And in that time, there's more and more talent that's being developed. There used to be a big talent shortage in the space because anyone that was any good at it was doing it themselves. But now there's plenty of talent. And I think aggregators kind of accelerated that with a lot of the hiring and the kind of seasoning over the last 3 or 4 years. So there's a lot of LinkedIn, there's a lot of Indeed type searches where you can go headhunt. But one thing I would say is don't blindly hire into PPC. Don't blindly bring on an agency. Make sure you've truly mastered that element of your business, being one of the top 3 levers in the business, so that you can then confidently and correctly lead the delegation of that activity.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's something that I would recommend as well. You can't have the blind leading the blind, right? And just because PPC is possibly one of your weak points, it doesn't mean that you could just go blindly hire somebody and be like, well, they said that they're a PPC expert, so they're just going to be able to spin gold for me, right? That's not the way it works. And Dan, I would be interested to hear your comment on this, but every product category behaves very differently on Amazon, even for PPC context, right? I think there are some PPC categories where you can get away with maybe a 5% tacos number, and you don't have to spend a whole lot on PPC, and you'll stay ranked organically fairly well, right? There are other product categories where you have to be looking at your customer lifetime value. Speaking of supplements, I think comes to the top of my mind, where you're losing money on the front end, right? Your tacos are going to be extremely high, but you're hoping that you're making all that money back on reorders, right? The subscribe and save. What's kind of your take on that? Because there are a lot of different like PPC methodologies out there. There's a bunch of different courses. But from what I've learned with over 1,300 different SKUs is that it's not a one size fits all.
So I think the way we have to categorize this is understanding kind of a universal framework that's not category or platform specific, but more strategically driven. And what I mean by that is, even if you're not a numbers person and you hate the numbers, there is a difference between understanding strategically the objective of PPC in your business to tactically knowing how to execute and achieve that objective. You can hire in the tactics, but you have to be in control of the strategy. And step one is understanding the type of product you sell. So is it subjective? Is it semi-subjective? Or is it non-subjective? So what I mean by that is all three products always fall into that. A non-subjective product, a spade's a spade. The shopping activity happens the top half of page one, and the consumer is just simply shopping, typically based on feature set of will this deliver what I'm looking for. Semi-subjective is feature plus design. So this could be a baby swaddle blanket. The feature is that the product is a swaddle blanket. The feature is I want it to comfortably and safely hold my baby. But the semi-subjective nature of that is the pattern, the material, the design element that's being built into that. And that opens up a whole range of avatars or ideal clients that could be buying that. Then you've got the completely subjective products, which are like home decor for men. And there's no specific keywords. You're struggling to find anything. There might be one keyword at best that kind of relevantly describes that product. And understanding it through this lens, and this is what we do within our Titan PPC framework, allows you to then set forth the correct strategy for that product. Now, there is one universal truth with all of this, whether it's Amazon, Google, anywhere, is follow the conversion. So the platforms give us a bunch of placements, top of search, rest search, product pages, and the right strategy and the right placement for you is dictated by where the conversion takes place. Now, within that, there is a relationship between where the conversion takes place, the placement, and the subjective nature of your product. If you've got a non-subjective product, you're likely going 60, 70% of your budget to exact match top of search because it's all about ranking that product for those highly relevant keywords. There's a bunch of them. There's some good volume. If it's semi-subjective, there's a broad blend of, well, let's take the highly relevant and get those into the exacts, but then I'm going to need to use some broader kind of close match autos or discovery campaigns to go find the keywords that I don't know yet. And then in the subjective, well, that's a complete broad game, and it's just about finding the placements that convert and attempting to extract any relevant terms to then put back into your exact. So I think regardless of the tactic or the tactic and all the different ways of kind of clicking the buttons and adjusting the bids and all the different things that people go on about, it's truly understanding the strategic objective by product based on the product type, and then understanding how do you get to control. And control on Amazon is exact match campaigns. The broader the subjectivity, the less control you have, and it's just about following the conversion.
Yeah.
Does that summarize kind of like a broad spectrum of PPC?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that I like the aspect of like, you got to understand like the strategy behind all of it, right? Like, what is your strategy? What's your end game to all of this? So Dan, I want to maybe turn more into maybe like some of the tactical levers that we could pull to increase the profitability of the business. You mentioned that there are three kind of like main drivers for profitability for an Amazon brand. Would you mind going over those? And then what I would like to do is kind of really dive into each one of those levers and talk about here are the specific tactics or things that we could do to affect these to increase our profitability.
Yeah, for sure. So inside of Titan, everything we do is bottoms up. And what I mean by bottom up is we start with the P&L. Most sellers are coming top down from a revenue standpoint or from a sales standpoint, and then wondering why they don't have the profitability at the end of the day. We start with the profit and then work backwards and effectively start with the P&L to get the financial ratios and foundations of the business in place to allow us to compete in the market, to give us the margin to acquire new customers, because ultimately he or she who can afford to spend the most to acquire a new customer wins on any platform. And these three kind of lines within your P&L that we reference in Titan are called contribution margin. So contribution margin 1, contribution margin 2, and contribution margin 3. Now, most sellers will be very familiar with contribution margin 3, which is your margin after ad spend. Contribution margin 2 is your margin before ad spend, and then contribution margin 1 is your after your COGS and your landed cost. So by focusing on these 3 levers within the business and on the P&L, we can take a bottoms up approach to impacting that CM3 level, which gives us more breathing space to compete. So and the reason that kind of historically you'll hear people saying, well, tacos should be around 10%. No, tacos should be a third of whatever your margin is as a rough ratio. The more margin we can create, then the more contribution margin at the bottom of that stack we're going to have. So this starts, if you think first ball principle thinking, this starts with the product. How can I make it more cost effective? How can I reduce the packaging size? How can I pull these levers to give me the highest CM1, which is after my landed cost potential? Because whatever I do at CM1 affects CM2 and affects CM3. Then when I get into Amazon and I pay all Amazon's fees and the cost of fulfillment there, how can I, again, optimize size? How can I drive efficiency in my Amazon fees to give me more CM2, to then be spending on advertising to affect that bottom line? So taking this kind of waterfall effect down the P&L, we end up with products with margins more like 45% or 40%, which allows me to spend that extra few percent more on my tacos profitably than my next competitor, who's only taking that top-down approach and has got a 15% margin and trying to spend 10% on advertising. So it really is about dialing in the P&L and understanding every single micro optimization down that process to give you the biggest margin at the bottom of the stack to be able to compete on the platform.
Yeah, no, I love that. So it sounds like you've got kind of like your COGS, right? So how do you get more efficient with the cost of your product is number one. Then number two, you've got your FBA fees, right? That you could really focus on. And then third, you've got kind of like your advertising costs that you could have a control over. So I believe that it all starts back up at that product level, which you referenced, right? How important like finding and identifying that right product is, which is also going to affect the COGS. But let's talk first about, how do you find a product that has 40% margin, especially in today's competitive environment where it feels like, definitely long gone are the days of Me Too products. Oh, I want to go buy a spatula, put my brand name on it, and I'm done, right? Those days are long gone. So where do you find these 40% margin type of products?
So our product research approach in Titan is extremely sophisticated and empowered with the tools technology that we've built. But it really comes down to effectively, one, understanding who it is you serve. And then two, looking for data-driven opportunities. And by data-driven, I mean keyword volume. There's depth of keywords. There's a good number of keywords. The competition on saturating the top 3 to 5 positions. We're removing brand competitor names. We want to see a certain number of keywords over 1,000 searches. We want to see a certain number of keywords over 100 searches, because not only does this kind of prove demand, we want to see a certain number of reviews as a threshold. It doesn't only just prove demand. It doesn't just kind of prove there's an entry point to a market. If you think about a market or a product as like a moving window, and you're looking for an entry point to then enter and then mature into, there's also enough depth of search and enough breadth of search to be able to compete on that product. That really hasn't changed in the last few years. What has changed is how you then innovate, develop, and buy that product. Success on Amazon today isn't all in the selling. Success is in the buying. And the days of buying and badging off Alibaba are something that, if you search backstretcher on Amazon and go and look at every backstretcher that looks exactly the same, that's never going to work, and it's an uphill battle. And one of the first things we do in Titan when they join is confront reality with their existing product set, and maybe 5 times in 10 say, hey, you need to discontinue this product and start again with a differentiation and innovative mindset. So finding the opportunity is not the difficult thing. There is plenty of opportunity on Amazon for viable products, and we have all our checks and balances for checking all those different things. The sellers that really win, it's in the way in which you then approach factories, put your product specs together, innovate and develop that product, and ultimately control cost while creating innovation. You get those 2 things right, and you are unstoppable in the market. And ultimately, you get the product right, and everything else takes care of itself. It really, truly is the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary. So to answer the question directly, I think for sellers to kind of find these products, and just to set scope on this, we've launched around 200, and I say around because it's updating daily, but we've launched 231 products this year. 100 of them are in our fully owned brands. The other 100 and something are in our partner brands. We've currently got 255 parent SKUs in development. And the update this morning from my leader on this, Matt, was 520, I think it was, 520 something SKUs total, including variations. We have built this machine. The research is in having that predictable, repeatable, consistent system for identifying opportunity and then taking them over into that buying process. So it's all in the buying.
I love that. And I think that also goes back to your China magic that you're a mentor on, right? And what you're saying is that long gone are the days of just going to Alibaba, seeing that there's a back scratcher, massage or whatever, and just buying whatever you see there. Are you saying that it's one of the core strengths and advantages is going and actually meeting and partnering with a manufacturer, and that's how you're going to be able to survive and scale profitably moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a lot easier, and it's a competitive advantage to do this in person. There is a certain culture, especially in China, where the majority of products are being manufactured, where you as the boss meeting the factory boss and kind of building that relationship, not only opens up capabilities and competitive advantages like speed to market or better payment terms so you can compound cash and grow faster, but it also does allow you to truly understand the first principle thinking of the product, to understand the material makeup, how it's made, and find those 1 or 2% kind of optimization points in the manufacturing process. And I mean, the law of compound growth, if for anyone that's into kind of compound investing, it doesn't take many 1% compounding together to make an exponential result. And going over to China, and we run this trip China Magic twice a year in April and October, is absolutely the fastest way of reducing that cycle. You can build relationships that might take you 2 or 3 years virtually in a few days, and you can get work that normally takes you 6 to 9 months virtually done in 2 or 3 days. So going to China is definitely a competitive advantage. But even if you're not going to China, it's really kind of taking the time, slowing down to speed up, and really understanding that kind of innovation point of the product and releasing a truly unique, differentiated product that visually stands out in the market. That's the goal.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that kind of leads us into number 2, which is the FBA fees. And I think if you're working hand in hand with your manufacturer, right, and you have a good line of communication with them, you're brainstorming with them, you know, Amazon's already laid out all of their dimension requirements, the weight requirements for all their different FBA tiers. How much time and effort do you put into, you know, when it comes to creating a product? Do you kind of model the product off of being able to fit within the small standardized tier versus large standard size, so you don't get pushed into the oversized product category or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're definitely optimizing to the market. So if all of our competitors are in a certain category, we'll definitely see if there's a way of kind of moving down a category. It's not always possible. We definitely won't, and we'll put hard limits in place to ensure that we don't make the mistake of going into the category above, so that we're kind of failing from the offset on fees. So like repackaging the product into smaller packaging to reduce the size tier, or the dimensional weight of the product is something we're definitely really, really focused on. We're also, every month for our existing products, we run a fee preview report every single month to verify that we're not being overcharged. And we submit a seller central support case as needed every single month. That's something I see sellers kind of forgetting, and then realizing maybe a year later that they could have saved 2 or 3%. If all they'd done is just kind of kept Amazon in check on their fees. And then we're also kind of looking for where else in that kind of CM2 layer that we call it, the logistics layer, such as, are we storing excess inventory at our factory for free and then paying for it when it ships versus shipping it all into a 3PL and paying the storage fees? Can we prep our shipments in China for free, regardless of the final destination? We're always looking for these kind of cost-saving initiatives within that kind of CM2 layer, because like I said, anything we do at CM1 in COGS, anything we do at CM2 in the kind of logistics and the last mile, all roll down into our ability to kind of spend on advertising, but also kind of make that profit.
Yeah. I think you touched on a really, really important aspect here. And that is, again, going back to having a good partnership with your manufacturer can be a game changer for your business, not only in new product development, but in terms of being able to reduce some of your 3PL costs, just overall, prep fees to get something over to Amazon. If you can create a type of relationship with your manufacturer where you could order 10,000 units, they only ship 5,000 to you now, and then they will store the other 5,000 units for you. And then you could take delivery of them 2, 3, 4 months from now. Imagine being able to save on the cost of the product up front, right? And then not having to ideally pay for any 3PL fees to warehouse that inventory, and then being able to ship it straight to Amazon. So I think that, again, lends back to there's so much value to creating a good positive relationship with the manufacturer that it truly can be not only a competitive advantage, I would argue it is going to be what's required in order to stay relevant on Amazon over the next decade. And so I think I just wanted to double down on that part there. Dan, another thing that you touched on for CM2, which is basically looking at your Amazon fees and warehousing and how much you're spending in Amazon, just, warehousing costs overall.
Yeah.
Those are only increasing, right? So how do you limit those?
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is, again, like where you have to get, if you kind of break this down into kind of the 3 buckets, CM1, CM2, CM3, there's plenty of optimization kind of potentials in CM2. Like I said, from the packaging to running purchase analysis across multiple suppliers, to identifying kind of different sustainability. So Amazon has a new program, actually. We got qualified for this, that saves 20 cents per unit for a sustainability program that they're running. So it's about it's 22 cents per unit. So it's about leaning into understanding every which way you can attack that stage of the cost in the funnel of the process, to free up more margin for the next stage. And it, as you said, it all does come down to 2 things: your relationship with your supplier, because that relationship is going to result in reduced COGS, improved payment terms. I mean, Leiden, my partner, was out in China recently with our China Magic trip in October, and was able to affect $2.5 million of cash flow because he was able to move a bunch of our products from 30-70 terms to 10% deposits, 90% 120 days after shipping, which means we've started selling the products before we're paying the balance. And then also getting extended terms like 6 months of credit by offering the supplier 4% interest on the credit, which is a much cheaper than us taking a working capital loan at mid-teens. So using our suppliers as kind of financiers as well. So there's a bunch of like advanced stuff that you can do like that. But I think you've really just got to ask yourself, what does the consumer expect? I see a lot of sellers kind of, because there was a big push a few years ago of, you must do all this fancy packaging, make a product like Apple, when the rest of the market is selling this product in a see-through poly bag with a nice label, because it's a commodity product. They don't care what the packaging is. It costs them $15 and it's an everyday thing. Yet you're spending $2 or $3 on this fancy packaging, thinking that that's influencing the purchase decision. So I think it's about kind of confronting reality, meeting the market where it's at, leading with an innovation in the product, but then really focusing on how you optimize every single cost base.
Yeah, I like that. Another thing that you mentioned that I think is important to like really call out to our listeners is you talked about doing like an FBA fee, preview report on a monthly basis. Basically, Amazon, and we've seen this a lot with our products, Amazon randomly will kind of inaccurately measure a product or inaccurately weigh it, right? And so overnight, you could be, all of a sudden you're in small standard size and then you have to shift to large standard size or even oversized for no reason, right? And so it is important that if you're not actively watching that, that can be where you're actually leaking a lot of profit margin just because nobody's paying attention to it. And Amazon's not going to tell you. You don't get an email saying, hey, do you want to come check this or do you want to fight this remeasurement? No, like Amazon just makes the change. And if you're not staying on top of it, you're going to lose that profit margin. You also talked about dimensional weight. And I think this is still one of the most overlooked things. People still pay attention to, well, my product is only, it's 11 inches by 14. So I'm still in the small size category, small standard size. But if your product is 5 inches, 11 by 14 and 5 inches thick, guess what? It might be, it might only weigh 1 ounce, which is really light. But because of how big it is, your dimensional weight is then going to push it into where Amazon sees it as effectively being, a 5-pound product. And so you're paying 5-pound product FBA fees on a product that you're thinking, I'm in the lowest fee category on Amazon. And so really paying attention to that dimensional weight when it comes to deciding what packaging you're going to choose for your product is super, super important. So love all of that. Is there anything else you would add to optimizing FBA fees or anything in CM2 before we move on to CM3?
Let's take a look. I think to kind of give the listeners a bit of a benchmark, if you do your calculations, and I'll go CM1, CM2, and then we'll jump into CM3. What you're looking for is your COGS. You're aiming for your COGS to be around 20 to 30% of your revenue, which makes your contribution margin around 70 to kind of 90%, depending on kind of where you land. Amazon's then going to take 15 to 25% in fulfillment. It's going to take 14, 15% in commission fees. And then once you kind of take out your storage fees, your 3PL fees, etc., you're really aiming for that CM2, your gross profit margin, it's commonly referred to be in the 35 to 45% range. If you're not at 35 to 45% in today's market on Amazon with the increasing cost of advertising, you've got no chance of competing in the market in any level of competitive markets. Those ones where you got 5% tacos, they're generally either extremely emerging categories or they're super low volume and no one's making any real like volume money, like business money. So you're really aiming for that CM2 level to kind of hit that 35 to 45%. And then how we're getting there, I mean, I've got a whole list of things to check, a whole checklist, which we go through here in Titan. You got the fee previews, you got repackaging into smaller packaging, running purchase analysis for products selling more than a single unit to a customer, opportunity in creating variations of, say, a 2-pack versus a 5-pack and finding the cost efficiencies in that output. The Amazon programs, as I mentioned, like the sustainability. You want to see if your product can fit into a category with lower referral fees. Doesn't always work, but in some categories, there's a better category to be in that's still relevant. Optimizing your storage fees during Q4 and Q3 every year, because we all know they go up. So storing that excess inventory out of Amazon, but still making sure that you've got a proper forecast in place to cover your Q4. Running cost analysis for liquidation versus storage versus removal. Creating sales and promotions to increase sell-through rates. Like there's a whole list of tactical actions that you can take to affect CM2. And we've got something called the growth menu that we often give out that kind of give this whole list. But there's people always jump to kind of my packaging, my size. There are 30 or 40 ways that you can do this.
I love that. Fantastic. Those are some great ideas. All right, Dan. So we get to CM3 now, right? So this is where it's what's left over after advertising. So if we're getting 35 to 45% profit margin after CM2, right? After our FBA fees, after COGS, and after our 3PL costs, how much should we be budgeting for ad spend? Basically tacos.
Yeah, for sure. So the general rule of thumb here is a third of CM2. So if you're the reason kind of the 10 and 30, so 10% tacos, 30% ACOS has been thrown around for so many years, is typically, historically, that's where you would land, is around a 30% gross margin, contribution margin to CM2. And then you'd spend around a third of that on advertising at 10%. Now, with the cost of advertising increasing, this is why CM1 and CM2 have become ever so important, because 10% tacos today, you need to be in a mature position with a maturity on reviews. Your PPC and organic sales ratio needs to be heavy into the organics. You want to see your PPC sales kind of less than 40%, 30%. You need to be a market leader, and your organic kind of velocity is propping up your overall sales, and therefore you're hitting that 10%. Very rarely in kind of those mid competition and above categories, do you see 10% unless the SKU's been around a good 18 months, 2 years, and has achieved that level of maturity? I often talk about this like climbing Everest. You don't go from base camp to the peak of Everest in one move. You have to go from base camp to camp one, take a rest, gain some more experience, get a breath. That in Amazon terms, that's gain reviews, dial your conversioning, cut out your wasted ad spend in your PPC, focus in on the converting terms, figure out those placements, bid appropriately. Once you've stabilized and you've got your breath, you're then going to go to the next base camp. And eventually over about 18 months, you're eventually going to hit the peak of Everest. And that's what it means to kind of really own a category. And so that 35 to 45% CM2 level, you're spending around a third of that on advertising, which is, if you've got 35%, you're in that kind of like 12.5 to 15%-ish range on your tacos.
Makes a lot of sense. What do you recommend then? I mean, it's like, I like the analogy of climbing Everest, but if I think we've heard people getting close to 20% tacos when their ideal should be 12 to 15%, or heaven forbid, even 25, 30% tacos. So What happens? Because that's all we continue to hear. PPC costs and bids are only going up. What are your recommendations to try to shave off a few points of savings there, while also knowing that, you know, it's a delicate balance, right? If you turn off your ads, you could be profitable real quick overnight, and it may look good. You know, a month or two from now, you'll start to lose your organic rankings and the wheels start to fall off. So it's a delicate balance. How do you approach it?
So it really comes back to what I kind of started out saying, and it's understanding what is the objective of the PPC campaigns for the target product, for the life cycle stage it's in. And what I mean by that is often it's not an on-off switch. You're not turning off PPC to create profit. But just like an overgrown garden, what does a gardener do to get control of an overgrown garden? They prune and they chop it, they cut it back. So often what you'll find is sellers have a bunch of wasted ad spend in super broad placements and targeting types that they've got no business in targeting because the product isn't mature enough to be converting in those placements or for those broad keywords. So step one, let's cut all the wasted ad spend out. Let's shut off all the broad targeting campaigns. You loose match autos. I see people kind of going straight to broad when they've got a non-subjective product and they haven't got their exact dialed in. So it's about pulling back, pruning and chopping away all the bloat. Really focusing on where the control and the conversion is. So for those non-subjective products, those exact match top of search for the 10, 15 keywords that have got 500, 1,000 search volume that are hyper relevant to your product. And by hyper relevant, I mean, if you sell a blue widget set of 4 and there's 10 keywords that surround that route, you're going after those hyper relevant terms. Master those, use those to climb Everest, base camp 1, base camp 2, gain the reviews, get the conversion, dial in the content, and then start to expand into the broader terms and placements as you've gained the maturity, i.e. climbing the mountain. So for sellers that are currently kind of in that position where they just can't get a handle or control on their PPC, what I find 9 times out of 10 is they've got too much wasted ad spend. They're targeting placements and campaign types that they've got no business targeting or deploying because they're not mature enough in the product. And actually, they need to cut back and focus their budget on less is more. Simplicity scales, complex doesn't. And it's actually a case of like pruning to allow it to then mature and grow.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Do you find that as you consult or advise other people that there's just a lot of wasted ad spend happening more often than not?
There's a bunch, and in Titan we've just built a new tool for this actually inside of the Titan tool set that automatically identifies this. But I think the problem is I say, you kind of hear me here talking about wasted ad spend. Again, it comes back to determining, okay, objective for the product, strategy for the product. What is wasted ad spend? And 9 times out of 10, like I've said, it's those broad placements, those broad campaign types, those broad targeting types, those broad keywords that sellers are attempting to convert on when they've got no business targeting them because they're not mature enough in the SKU.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, Dan, this has been fantastic. I know this has been a fire hydrant of information. Feel like we're drinking from a fire hose for sure. But is there anything else on the top of your mind that you want to convey to sellers to help them scale profitably in 2024?
Yeah, I think for anyone really kind of sat here saying, I used to have this business that was profitable and now it's declining, or I can't find traction. PPC is eating all my profits. Really kind of bring it back to the life cycle stage of the product, the objective of the PPC. Confront reality on the product itself. Do you have something that's visually differentiated? Do you have a clear idea of the avatar you're serving, the brand you're creating, or are you just another Me Too product off Alibaba trying to compete on PPC without a proper strategy in place? And then also look at the market. And if you're in a real shallow market and there's thousands of products competing on one keyword and it's non-subjective, that's just a race to the bottom on price. So I think it's about taking a step back, auditing your current position, understanding the health of each SKU, the objective of where it's at in its life cycle, and then putting a plan in place at a SKU level to start regaining that traction and generating profit. Often sellers think about profit as this all-encompassing kind of business, when actually the work's done at the product level, and it's done product by product, block by block, and then also understanding when to stop. When do you need to cut away a product from your catalog because it's cannibalizing the overall profitability of the business and it doesn't have those things in place? And this is everything that we teach inside of Titan and have systems to deploy.
I love that. Dan, this has been amazing. As we wrap up this episode, I love to leave our audience with 3 actionable takeaways from every episode. So here are the 3 actionable takeaways that I noted. Dan, you let me know if you think I'm missing something here. But number 1, starts with contribution margin number 1 that we talked about, which is identifying a unique product, right? This comes into not just sourcing a Me Too product off of Alibaba. You need to do a little bit of product differentiation here. This is where the majority of your profit is going to be made. It's in the buying of the product, not the selling of the product. And so when you buy a uniquely designed or uniquely differentiated product, this is what's going to help you be a lot more profitable in the entire product category. And to echo onto that sentiment would be establishing a solid relationship with a manufacturer that A, can help you brainstorm ideas for your product, and then B, they are going to be the ones that are going to have a direct impact to your contribution margin number 2, which is going to be your FBA fees, your warehousing fees, and all of those things. Payment terms is what we talked about. So if you don't have a really good relationship with your manufacturer, action item number 1, go create a really good relationship with your manufacturer. Action item number 2, you should be focused with kind of like, you need to have hawk eyes on all of the fees that you are being charged on Amazon. Even if you're not a numbers person, there are a lot of different tools. We had Gatita on the podcast previously. There are a number of different tools that you can use to make sure, am I getting reimbursed for inventory that's getting lost or damaged at FBA? Am I also being charged the correct FBA fulfillment fee for my products? Is there an opportunity to reduce my packaging? Am I looking at the dimensional weight of my product? What's my 3PL cost? The list goes on, as Dan mentioned there. So if that is not an active focus for anybody on your team, I promise you, you can find a lot of profit margin and clean up basically and gain a couple extra points of profit margin for your business just by paying attention to those. And final, last but not least, action item number 3 is PPC spend. As Dan mentioned numerous times here, it all goes back to your overall strategy that you have, right? And understanding where are you in the maturity of that product? Is there clear differentiation, or are you just competing as another Me Too product? And understanding what type of bids that you need to have, what type of campaigns, and where you should be investing most of your ad spend all goes back to what's the purpose for the product and the relevancy to the product. So there's a lot to go back, rewind on here. And then last but not least, don't forget about wasted ad spend. But again, that wasted ad spend only helps if you know the overall strategy. So Dan, is there anything else that I skipped over?
No, I think you nailed it, man. I think you got it, Josh. Just focus on the objective for the product and deploy the strategy to achieve the objective.
I love it. Now, it's great to hear all these good words. The implementation of it is where the rubber meets the road, as you know. So, Dan, I love to ask each guest the following 3 questions as we wrap it all up here. So, number 1, what's been the most influential book that you've read and why?
I think one I always come back to is The One Thing. And I'm a big believer in this. We've got a bunch going on and we're constantly innovating and we really push the boundaries. And in doing that, the reason we're able to compound growth so quickly is I'm constantly pushing my team on what's the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary. And that one thing for us recently was in upgrading all of our PPC methodology and really kind of collating what we'd learned the last 18 months since we last updated it. And that'll be coming here soon. So just sit down and ask yourself kind of what is the one thing right now that would make everything else easier or unnecessary. So it's a great book and a great read.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorite books. I'll echo that sentiment. Question number 2, what's your favorite productivity tool or a new software tool that you've recently discovered that you think is a game changer?
I love read.ai. So in my role, kind of CEO of Titan and across all the brand activity, 9 figures of revenue, as you can imagine, I'm across quite a few team meetings, external meetings, planning meetings, and I've just found my productivity skyrocket recently with read.ai. Now, there's a few of these note taker tools out there, but this one I found to be kind of the best an all-rounder from not only capturing the conversation correctly, the actions and the feedback, but also recording and creating highlight reels, and then the ability to kind of drop those into Slack channels, and it's just become a game changer. So we've actually now just licensed it at an enterprise level and given it access to all of our management team.
I love that. I love a new tool. So I'm going to be checking that one. Read.ai. I'm going to be checking that out. All right, Dan, last question. Who is somebody that you admire or respect the most in the e-commerce space that other people should be following, and why?
So I thought about this long and hard when you asked me about this earlier. And you got to remember what Titan is. Titan is not just me. There's 40 or 50 versions of me that have all come together collectively to really push the boundaries on innovation and the power of collective contribution. One of those individuals is a guy called Justin Dyson. Justin has had a multi-7-figure exit already in his career and now is across multi-8 figures of revenue across our portfolio, really kind of driving and dictating a lot of the growth strategy that you hear me talk about here in our own operating and our own brands. And Justin's superpower, which I've always had a massive amount of respect for, is being able to take these seemingly huge, complex, overwhelming questions like PPC or like profitability, and being able to distill them down into a granular point of sophisticated simplicity that is predictable, repeatable, and consistent. So yeah, big shout out to Justin Dyson. Definitely one of the best brains in the space, and very grateful to have him around in Titan.
I agree. I've met Justin, and we need to get him on the podcast. So great recommendation. Dan, Thank you so much for your time today. This has been super valuable. If other people want to learn more about you, they want to follow your journey, learn more about Titan, where can they reach out to you and learn more? Yeah, sure. So head over to titannetwork.com or Titan Network Official on Instagram, or if you want to hit me up directly, you can connect with me on Facebook. Just add me as a friend, Dan Ashburn, and we can connect there. Awesome. Dan, thanks again for your time today. Thanks, Josh. Really enjoyed it, man.
Thank you for listening. Visit ecommbreakthrough.com for more information. If you've enjoyed today's episode, the best way you can show your appreciation is by clicking the subscribe button and quickly leaving a review. See you again next time.